Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield done. Now the long walk back to the lodge. 3:55 a.m., just signed in. Santanoni Range, let's go. The wind is whipping here in the Seward Range today. Just finished the Macomb slide and my legs are on fire. Well, I fell victim to the floating logs again. Made it to the top of East Dix. Peak number 3 of 5 for today here in the Dix Range. Avalanche Pass. On top of Rocky Peak Bridge. It's like a hurricane up here. Rain and wind here on Tabletop. Whiteface, number 6. Muddy day here on Street and Nye for number 7 and 8. Sunny and blue on Haystack. Algonquin, up in the clouds, number 18. Gothics, number 22. Panther, number 38. Allen, number 45. 7:12 a.m. Big Slide, Adirondack 46er. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. Saturday, July 13th. Time to head deep into the High Peaks wilderness to finally visit a place that I've researched extensively, seen tons of photos of, and even recorded an entire podcast episode about. An episode that I deem the best episode that I've ever released, in fact. I was heading to the plane crash site on Mount Marshall, and to the summit, of course. Obviously, we're going to go to the summit as well. But the story of this 1969 plane crash has always fascinated me, ever since I first researched it for my podcast, which is episode 102, entitled The Miracle on Mount Marshall. The reasons being because 1, the pilot, Peter Simmons from Long Island, survived, and 2, because of the heroic search and rescue that took place thanks to the DEC and legendary Adirondack Forest Ranger Gary Hodgson and crew. It's both a search and rescue and a survival story worthy of a Hollywood movie. The story is fantastic. But today was the day to finally go visit this sacred ground. And since this hike was another one of my guided group hikes, I had the pleasure of hiking with a couple of Matts. Matt from New Jersey and Matt from Troy. We met bright and early for a 5:30 a.m. start from the Adirondack Lodge. Upon pulling into the parking lot, Matt from New Jersey was prepping his gear, and a few minutes later, the other Matt showed up and we were ready to rock. Unfortunately, another former guide client of mine, Steve, had to cancel, but shout out to avid podcast listener and supporter of mine, Steve Von Schenk. We all said our hellos and signed in at 5:30 a.m. Mount Marshall, we're heading your way. Time to hit the trail. Our plan for today's 16-mile hike with 3,300 feet of elevation was to hike in via Avalanche Pass, go past Avalanche Lake towards Lake Colden, all the way to Cold Brook Pass, where we'll hike it for the very first time. From there, we'd head up the pass along the brook as we make our way to the plane crash site, before continuing up towards Mount Marshall to the Marshall Trail for the final push to the summit. And to keep it interesting, our hike would be a loop today, continuing on Cold Brook Pass down to Indian Pass and back to Heart Lake and the Lodge. A big day was ahead of us and the sun was shining. For now, anyways. All right, coming for Mount Marshall. It is a beautiful sunny morning here in the High Peaks. We're on our way towards Marcy Dam. We are signed in a little after 5:30. The sun is shining, the sky is blue. It should be an awesome day right now. Lots of people here getting ready to hike the High Peaks. Our plan is to go to Marshall through Avalanche Pass, turn right up Cold Brook Pass, then stop and see the airplane crash, then continue up the trail, and then head over to the summit of Marshall, come back, and then go further and head towards Indian Pass and take that back to the lodge where we started, with a little pit stop at Wallface. So that is the goal, and we're on our way. So we signed in and began the always enjoyable warm-up into Marcy Dam, a 2.3-mile stretch that every Adirondack High Peaks hiker will get to know very well on their journey through the High Peaks. Over the bridges and through the woods to Marcy Dam we went, past the Algonquin Trail split and onward to the dam. The clouds were minimal today, and once we arrived at Marcy Dam, the summits were all looking pristine as Wright towered above us and Colden looked as glorious as ever in front of us to the south. All right, 6:25. We have made it to Marcy Dam, crossing over the bridge.
The water level, it looks pretty normal, quite honestly, from what it normally is. But the water looks fresh. I'd love to drink it. I can't wait to drink it. The clouds are moving, but it's a fantastic day right now, fantastic view. Crossing over the river, and soon we will hop onto the Avalanche Pass Trail, onward towards Marshall.
Marshall is one of those mountains that doesn't get a lot of recognition because no matter which way you hike it, whether from the lodge or from the Upper Works trailhead, it is a long hike for very minimal summit views. And yes, spoilers, Mount Marshall ranks very low on the Summit Sandwichability Scale, better known as the SSA scale. But like every mountain in the high peaks, they all have their place in the story. So onward to Marshall we go. Once at the dam, we crossed the bridge and carried on up to the Avalanche Pass Trail to begin the next phase of the hike. Next stop, the Lake Arnold Trail Split. And as we crossed over the wooden bridge just before the Lake Arnold Trail, I reminisced with the Mats about the end of my longest hike to date, still to this day. And for those longtime podcast listeners, you may remember my episode hiking Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield, which is a fan favorite actually, and it's a hike that I think about often. It was an interesting day, to say the least, and if you haven't heard that episode, I recommend checking it out. Anyways, on that day, I had a great conversation with a camper who was hanging out on that bridge at the Lake Arnold Junction, and it was a very major morale boost for me on that day, a day where my brain was just shutting down and I was ready to be done. But anyways, check out that episode to hear the whole story. But this bridge will always make me think back to that memory of that day.
All right, we have made it to the Avalanche Pass Lake Colden Trail Split, or Lake Arnold Trail Split. Bunch of people sleeping in tents, although they're still at their campsite, therefore their day's half over, time to wake up. Anyways, onward, taking a right towards Avalanche Pass, which we'll be at in a little bit after we climb up a bunch of loose rocks and whatnot. So far, so good. Just me and the Mats having a good old time in the high peaks.
So after 3.5 miles of hiking, we made it to the Lake Arnold Avalanche Pass Junction, and we went right towards Avalanche Lake. The trail climbs a little way up the northern slope of Mount Colden as it skirts between Colden and Avalanche Mountain before going down towards the lake. And shortly after we passed the cliffs that line a portion of the trail, we came to a newer trail reroute that I was not expecting, but it does appear there's been some trail work going on back there this summer. Likely due to the actual trail becoming an absolute stream, but it's a short section of trail on the final stretch down to the lake. Speaking of the lake,
7:30, we are at Avalanche Lake, looking as magnificent and quiet and calm and peaceful as ever, with Avalanche Mountain on our right and Colden on our left. This view never gets old. This location never gets old. Just great stuff. And there's some new trail work. I haven't been out here yet this summer. There's some new trail work on this trail. A little reroute action, but not too different. But overall, perfect day right now. Although there are clouds above us. I don't see the blue sky anymore, but they're still high. Doesn't look like rain clouds. Either way, a magnificent, flawless experience so far.
We walked out to the woods to the opening at the northern tip of the beloved Avalanche Lake, a lake nestled between Avalanche Mountain on the right to the east and Mount Colden on the left, an absolutely stunning piece of Adirondack wilderness. The lake sits over 2,800 feet elevation and is arguably the most peaceful location in the High Peaks Wilderness, if you ask me. There's just something really calming about being out there. And despite going there dozens of times, it really never gets old. Well, actually, the view and the feel of this lake doesn't get old, but I will say, traversing along the lake, along the Avalanche Pass Trail at that section, it does get a little old in my opinion. But we'll get into that in a minute. We decided to take our packs off and enjoy a quick swig and a snack to take in the view and enjoy our surroundings at this magnificent location. And during the break, Matt from Troy walked towards the water's edge to get a better vantage point for a photo, and he sunk right up to his ankle in the mud, almost losing a boot, quite literally. but at least he got the photo despite the now mud-filled boot, so I guess it was a win. And since we're on the subject of boots, this summer I picked up a trail runner for the very first time. Now, I've always been a boot kind of guy because of the endless mud in the Adirondack Mountains, and while everything has pros and cons, the pros of never having to worry about wet feet kind of outweighed everything else for me. But I've been curious, so I decided to pick up a pair of trail runners because the idea of wearing a light sneaker type of shoe sounded appealing, and I wanted to give it a try. I also like the idea of a wide toe box, so I bought the Ultra Lone Peaks, which I'm told are actually pretty much like the most popular trail runner in existence. So I've been hiking in them all summer, and I have to say, they're not bad. Kind of into it. Now, there were certainly times that I missed my boot, and in fact, later in this hike would be one of those times specifically. But in general, I have found them to be a worthwhile purchase. But I'm not giving up the boots, though. Rather, I'll choose which shoe depending on the weather conditions and the mountains for the day. Now, speaking of the trails sometimes getting a little old, it was time to make our way along the Avalanche Pass Trail. Traversing over these car-sized boulders that make up this slow-moving trail along the edge of the lake, you either love it or you hate it. Over the Hitch-Up Matilda we went, which is a suspension bridge attached to the mountain that hovers over the water. If you're familiar, you're picturing it right now as I talk about it, and if you've never been, it's a very memorable stretch of trail. Now, I've researched the origin of this story, and I've read numerous stories about the name, so I don't quite know which one is the actual story. One story is that the 19th century Adirondack guide, known as Bill Nye, was guiding some clients, and at that point he told his client Matilda to hitch up, meaning to get on his shoulders as he carried her across the water to not get her dress wet. Is that the actual story? Maybe, but there's a lot of other stories out there too, so hard to really know, I guess. Anyways, we passed our first people on the day. Rather, they passed us, a father and son who were also hiking Mount Marshall, coincidentally. And we chatted for a minute before we went our separate ways. Soon we arrived across the lake at the trap dike going up Mount Colden, which, thanks to the destructively heavy rains that we had recently in the Adirondacks, was flowing like a waterfall. No, it was not a full-fledged waterfall, but the water running down it was very wide, and the sound was heavy like an actual waterfall, though.
Climbing along Avalanche Pass over the Hitch-Up Matilda, and now we're directly across from the trap dike, which sounds like a waterfall as the water from the recent rainstorm flows down like a little river. Looking at the trap dike, the entire left side of the dike is a flowing river. Hopefully you can hear it. But yeah, it sounds like a waterfall.
Hello, my name is Randall from Eastern Long Island. I'm an avid outdoorsman who loves exploring the Adirondacks. But when you live hours from the nearest mountain and you're recovering from major knee surgery, training for the steep, rugged terrain of the High Peaks Wilderness can prove to be a real challenge. That's why I joined the Great Range Athlete Program. James's guidance, along with the support of my fellow teammates, helped me power through the 6-week intensive training program tailored to my specific goals and needs. After completing the program, I was amazed to see that I went above and beyond my initial goals. I'm now a more durable, stronger, and faster hiker than I was before my operation. This summer, I completed 3 High Peaks mountain ranges, and I'm closing in on becoming an Adirondack 46er. Hey, I just turned 55. I have 2 knee replacements, I live at sea level, and I'm in the best mountain hiking condition of my life. I can't say enough about the Great Range Athlete Program. I should also mention it was a lot of fun. So much fun, in fact, I'm signing up again. I'll see you in the fall.
After passing the end of the lake, we made it to another trail register, the Avalanche Pass Lake Colden Trail Register. So I signed us in there too. Now you may be wondering, why would you sign in again? Well, the reason that you should always sign in at each trailhead is because if you need to be rescued because you're lost, these trail registers will help the rangers know exactly how far you made it. So if you only sign in at the lodge and nowhere else, but you're lost on Mount Marshall, in their mind, you could really be anywhere between the lodge and the summit of Marshall or anywhere else. Whereas if you signed in at that next trail register as well, they'll know that you at least made it this far safely. So it only really helps you, and it only takes a second. Plus, who doesn't love hearing this sound? You get the idea. And yes, even though you may not be signing out because you're hiking out a different route, it still behooves you to sign in, for those search and rescue reasons that I just mentioned.
All right, we just had our first swig and a snack break. We're at the second trail register, crossing now over to the right to head on the, I guess technically the north side of Lake Colden towards Marshall. I think the north side. But anyways, yes, we have made our first checkpoint. We had a swig and a snack. We're fueled up. The day continues to be great. It's humid. We're all very moist, but that's okay. We're all friends. It's fine. We can be wet and sweaty and gross. But next stop, the trailhead up the Cold Brook Pass Trail.
Now at this point, we were just over 5.5 miles into the hike, so after slamming a protein bar, we started hiking and went right towards Mount Marshall, as opposed to going left towards Mount Colden. We had another half mile before our first major destination of the day, the Cold Brook Pass Trail, which would take us up Mount Marshall. The trail goes up in the woods along the western side of the lake, but you soon lose the lake, but you do gain a terrific forest around you, filled with evergreen trees and that green moss that lines the ground along with the brown trail, and then the sun shining through the canopy and that lighting up the ground with that orange glow. You know what I'm talking about. You just can't beat that atmosphere in the woods.
All right, we made it to the trail split where you can go left to Algonquin. I guess from our direction, you can go right over to Algonquin, which is 2.1 miles away and 2,300 feet of gain. It is a steep trail if you've ever gone up Algonquin from this side, but we're gonna continue on, and shortly we will be at our destination to start climbing up Mount Marshall, Cold Brook Pass. Almost there.
We quickly passed the trail for Algonquin, and soon we were at our destination, the Cold Brook Pass Trail. We wasted no time and began climbing. Time to gain some real elevation.
All right, we made it to Cold Brook Pass. We've got to turn right onto Cold Brook Pass. We're going to start climbing up Marshall with a pit stop at the airplane. And then from there, we will continue on to the summit of Marshall, where we will all enjoy a summit sandwich. I have a grilled chicken sandwich. Matt 1 has a turkey sandwich. And Matt 2 has peanut butter and jelly. Triple decker? Triple decker. The man followed my guidance, and he made a triple decker. That's the way to go. All right, the woods are amazing right now because the sun is shining through it, and it's this like very Bigfoot looking forest, so I'm always really into it. Just past the Lake Colden outpost. And here we go, up Cold Brook Pass.
Now, we wanted to stop at the airplane crash site on our way up the mountain since it broke up the ascent nicely, which is why we opted to climb Marshall in this direction and via these trails today. There are also other trails that you can take, but because we wanted the whole day to be a loop, this is what made the most sense. Now, the crash site was 1.3 miles away from the junction, but we had just over 1,000 feet of elevation to go to get there, so the climbing was about to really commence. And like every stretch of trail on Mount Marshall, it was rugged, wet, and it went straight up. Because like many trails here in the Adirondack High Peaks, the trails run directly next to and oftentimes in a drainage, right? No shortage of water on this hike as we climbed along, across, and even in the Cold Brook. I can also attest that the Cold Brook is both cold and absolutely delicious. Can't beat that Adirondack River water. Now, the Matts were climbing well, and we enjoyed great conversation as we climbed about everything from the mountains to the current state of the world to fishing charter boats off the coast of New Jersey and everything in between. But the sun continued to shine, the Cold Brook flowed all around us, and we climbed and we climbed.
All right, we have come out here on the Cold Brook Pass Trail. We're a little above the river now. We've come out to this really cool little marshy, swampy meadow, but like clearing in the trees. We have some cool views. Marcy's behind us in the clouds, Colden up above, but it's like this like open area. There's a nice wooden boardwalk. Yeah, it's my first time on this trail. It's pretty awesome. A real quad burner, a lot of steep climbs and, stepping up high, using those quads to stand up, really testing the old trail legs. Fantastic day. The sun is out. It's warm. It's humid. It's hot. It's awesome though. I'm very wet. I'll change my shirt at the summit. But we are approaching around where the turnoff is going to be to go see this airplane, and I'm psyched. But continuing onward.
Now, Matt from Troy hiked today without trekking poles and learned very quickly just how useful they really are in the mountains. From spreading the workout from your legs to your upper body on the ascents, to minimizing the impact on your knees during the descents, to being a highly effective balancing tool while crossing rivers. And there sure were a lot of river crossings today. I'll tell you, trekking poles may feel clunky at first, but trust me, I swear by them. They are worth their weight in gold. Get over that clunky feeling and they will be so useful for you on your hikes.
Well, the trail right now, lots of rocks and boulders, but it's basically a little river stream that we're walking through. Wet foot. But so far, we're really close, I believe, to around where the turnoff is for the airplane, but thanks to all the rain we had, the trail is currently a moist one. Slow moving, but lots of big boulders to hop from one to one.
So as we climbed, I knew we would be near the trail junction for the airplane when we arrived to a giant boulder on the trail in a cairn. And once we arrived there, we found the boulder, and there was a cairn. A makeshift cairn though, one that was not made from rocks, but from airplane wreckage. And then I looked into the woods on my left, and there it was. The wreckage from the Cherokee 150 airplane. We made it.
All right, we've been looking for a big boulder because I knew there was a big boulder kind of marking this area, and there is a little herd path back to the plane, but I see it through the woods. So I'm heading back here. We have made it to the airplane, which for all of you who listen to my podcast and listened to the Miracle on Mount Marshall episode I put out like a year and a half ago. In my opinion, it's the number one best episode I've ever put out on my podcast. If you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to check it out because A, it's just a great story, but I think it's the best episode I've ever done. But the story is just absolutely magnificent. But I've actually never been here in person, so this is the first time. What a wild experience this is to actually be here in person, because let's just say I researched this story a lot when I did that episode. Unbelievable. Amazing. All right. Time to take a couple pictures.
Arriving at the crash site was like a religious experience for me because I researched so much about it and I wrote an entire episode on it. And also because I actually love the story so much because, as I said earlier, it has everything a good woods story needs. Survival against all odds, a heroic rescue against all odds, just a truly amazing story, and now I was finally here in person to see it. The plane landed in the pass between Mount Marshall and Iroquois. I was just looking around realizing these are the woods that this plane landed in. Unbelievable. And one of the wings is off to the side of the airplane, sprawled out in the woods, as the rest of the plane sits on the forest floor. I immediately took tons of photos of the plane, as well as photos with the mats. And I sat inside the plane for a minute, stood on the wing and just took it all in, right? I had to get the full experience. And again, if you haven't listened to episode 102 of this podcast and you want to get that full story of the crash, that'll give it to you. Now, while this wasn't a summit, it was the first big stop on our itinerary for the day, so it was time to drop the pack and have a snack. And we stayed at the wreckage for a good 15 minutes as I explored the woods all around to take it all in, and to get a glimpse of the woods that the plane finally landed in. There's been so many plane crashes in the Adirondack Mountains over the years, but I'd say this one's probably the most notable, along with the crash on Wright Peak. Rest in peace to the soldiers who lost their life on that crash. Now, after enjoying a snack and lots of photos, we were ready to carry on up the trail because we had our next destination in our sights, Mount Marshall. So long, Cherokee 150, property of F. Peter Simmons of Long Island. What a story you have to tell. From the plane wreckage to the Marshall Trail is only about a quarter mile or so. Therefore, we made it to the split in no time at all. And now that we were filled with electrolytes and tasty treats, we were fueled up and ready for the push to the summit.
Down there anyway.
Yeah. All right, we made it to the cairn to head up over up to the top of Marshall. leaving this Cold Brook Pass. There's marked by a cairn, and we've got probably like half a mile. I think it's roughly around that. But there's a good chunk of elevation gain, especially at the end, about 300 feet right at the end. So there'll be a bit of a climbing, but here we go. Next stop, Mount Marshall.
From the trail junction to the summit, it's a little over half a mile with 500 feet of gain. So there was definitely still work to be done still. Work that involved going up and over one hump on the mountain before ascending to the true summit. Fortunately, the sun was still shining. For now, anyways. Our emotions were high after visiting that airplane, and we scaled the evergreen-covered Mount Marshall, enjoying the smells and the scenery of all the little fir trees surrounding us. You just can't beat this type of forest. Over the hump we went and back down before the true final push to the summit. Now, still no sign of other hikers during the ascent, but that all changed once we would arrive at the summit. We heard the sounds of people up ahead as the three of us climbed onto the summit and walked the maze over to the true summit and a brown wooden sign with yellow letters that said Mount Marshall. We made it. And we were greeted by a group of other hikers, around 7 or 8 of them actually, all enjoying a summit snack as they awaited one of their members to get to the summit, who was completing his Adirondack 46er journey. So that was actually pretty exciting to get to watch that happen. And then moments later, he arrived on the summit and officially became an Adirondack 46er right here on Mount Marshall. So what great timing to get to enjoy that experience with another person. Now, the last time I was on this mountain, I was by myself, and it was a rainy, wet day, eating a sandwich by myself in the rain. And today, however, the sun was shining, and it was a celebration. Talk about polar opposite experiences on this summit. Hello, Mount Marshall, which stands 4,380 feet elevation, the 25th tallest peak in the Adirondack Park. We all enjoyed a delicious summit sandwich and Blue Line Bakery cookie as we mingled with the crew from Keene celebrating a 46er finish. And I did feel a little bit like we were crashing their party, but you know, what can you do? It's kind of part of it. But about 15 minutes after we got to the summit, after devouring a sandwich, some salty chips, and some delicious cookies, the mood changed. Not from the people, but from the mountain. Suddenly, the drops started falling from the sky. Yup, the beautiful sunny day we had so far was no longer sunny. The rain began, and the clouds above us were dark. So the three of us decided that was our cue to start hiking back down to Cold Brook Pass and continue our day.
All right, it is just afternoon. We are heading back. We have already made it to Marshall, but I did not record a voice memo when we got to the summit because George from Keene Valley was finishing his 46 and had a bunch of people up here, and I did not want to ruin that with a voice memo from me. But anyways, congratulations, George, on completing the 46. What an awesome time. And now we are caught in a rainstorm. It was not expected to rain today. We're caught in a rainstorm. These mountains do not abide by your weather forecasts. So now we're going to run down the mountain.
And the rain continued to pour. It did only last for around 10 minutes or so before stopping. And then, of course, the sun came back out and so did the blue skies. You know, just enough rain to just drench the woods, drench the trail, and drench us and make the conditions less than favorable. You know, once again, the mountains don't care about you, nor should they.
Just like that. The clouds came, the rain came, drenched us, drenched the woods, and now look at above us. Beautiful blue sky, the sun is back out. Always bring those rain jackets. Always be prepared for rain. That's why you always got to at least have it. Of course, today it doesn't make a difference because we are all drenched in sweat regardless, but the rain came out of nowhere, drenched us, drenched the woods, and then the rain left as fast as it came in. Continuing down Marshall.
So down the mountain we went towards Cold Brook Pass as our bodies and packs brushed up against the narrow trail and the water from all the trees around us constantly fell on us. Now we were really drenched. And sure, the sun was out again, right? So, we were a little drenched, but now we'll dry off, right? Great, the sun is going to make us dry. We'll be fine for the rest of the hike out, right? Right? Wrong. Probably around 30 minutes later, after drying out from that first rain, thanks to the shining sun, another cloud rushed in and the rain began again. only for about 5 minutes though this time. Just enough time once again to keep the High Peaks Wilderness nice and moist. Ah, life in the mountains, am I right? This is why you always need to be prepared for rain. The weather truly can change quickly out there, and this is a prime example of how that happens. So we made it back down to the Coldbrook Pass Trail and we went left, this time to continue over the mountain to the opposite side that we hiked in on towards Indian Pass. Having completed this loop in the fashion we did today, I really don't see any benefit one way or the other regarding which direction you hike in on. They're both pretty similar, I would say. But it was great being on a new trail that I've never hiked before here on Coldbrook Pass and experiencing something new here in the High Peaks Wilderness. The junction to Indian Pass is 2.3 miles with lots of various river crossings as you descend and keep switching sides of the brook back and forth, crossing over, walking along it, then crossing back over. The trail goes through some beautiful woods, and with the stream, it actually offers lots of water refills, of course, but it also offers that true Adirondack backcountry experience that we're all searching for when we go hiking. Many times throughout the descent, I remember looking around and thought to myself, man, I am in the wilderness right now. You all know that feeling, and I find that it always hits so much harder the further you are from civilization, and especially when you're next to some big backcountry streams. There's something different about it being next to a river. Now, this 2.3 mile stretch did have a feeling of being pretty endless, though, I will say. And of course, we were all soaking wet. My shoes weren't too wet, thankfully, though. But you know what? Let's change that. Let's change that dry shoe thing. So while we were crossing one stretch of the brook, as we skirted our way down the trail between Marshall and Iroquois, I stepped on a makeshift deadfall bridge that was along the river. And then it happened. My foot went entirely in the river. The worst. Now, I will say some obscenities did come out of my mouth at that moment, so I apologize to the mats. But once crossing the stream, I changed my sock, dumped some water out of my shoe, and I just accepted that despite starting off sunny and great, this was going to be one of those classic wet slogs out of the High Peaks, which is actually very fitting for a day hiking Mount Marshall anyways. So we completed the hike down the eastern slope of Marshall and we made it to Indian Pass. All right. We're almost back, right? Only 5 more miles back to the car. Who doesn't love those long approaches?
All right, we made it to the Indian Pass Trail. Fantastic. It took a while. It was a slow trip down off of Marshall. We're on Indian Pass now, 4.9 miles to the lodge. So we've still got a long walk back to the lodge. Here we go. Sun shining though. We're wet. We've got some wet socks, wet feet, wet boots, a couple dunks. But here we are. Let's do it.
Now, despite a good number of miles still, the hard work of the day was complete at least, since this trip back was relatively flat. Flat-ish. But you know how these things go. During the hike, we discussed possibly going left at Indian Pass to hike over to the base of Wallface, which is the largest wall on the East Coast, in case you didn't know that. But we did opt against it and decided just to start the 5-mile trek back to the Adirondack Lodge instead. So we kicked things into overdrive and we started cruising. Eventually coming to a trail reroute that had us slightly confused, but we made do. And the trail reroute avoided a stretch of trail that had become a real swamp. And we were at the part of the hike where everyone was rather quiet, lost in their own thoughts and hiking in somewhat of a silence, just following the trail. All of you listening, you probably know that part of the day. It always happens. Now, the Indian Pass Trail runs along Indian Pass Brook, which for anyone who has hiked Street and Nye or heard, about when you hike Street and Nye that you should check about river levels, that's the river that you're crossing, Indian Pass Brook. But the sun was shining again, and as we were walking along the river, it was just an exceptional experience in the woods. You really can't beat those vibes. And with around 2 miles left in the hike, I will point out, there's one of the biggest trees that I've ever seen in the Adirondacks, and you really can't miss it. It's on the Indian Pass Trail, and it is massive. Our conversation started to pick up again once we passed the street in Nye Junction and we arrived at Heart Lake. You know, you get that final push of energy. Oh, school's almost out. Oh, actually, I'm really awake. That's pretty much what happened here on the final push to the trailhead. And then upon passing Mount Joe, I asked Matt from New Jersey how much he would need to be paid to turn around and go do the loop again right now. He said $1,000, but I was able to whittle him down to about $500 to get the real price point. But we didn't actually turn around. Needless to say, we were all ready to get back to our cars, take off our wet clothes, and get dry. A few steps later, we were finally back at the Adirondack Lodge, back at the parking lot. Well, we have made it back to the Adirondack Lodge, back to the trailhead. Our day is complete. What a day, filled with sunshine and rain, and then more sunshine, and then more rain. And what else we got? We got plane crashes. We've got summits. We had 46er finishes. We got dogs over here. We got rivers. We had stepping in rivers. Just everything you could want in an Adirondack High Peaks adventure. A phenomenal day in the High Peaks. Can't ask for anything better. The day was complete. The loop was complete. It started out with sun and it ended with sun with a couple of wet patches in between. But overall, it was another awesome day filled with new experiences thanks to our beloved High Peaks wilderness. It's a pleasure and a privilege exploring these woods and this mountain. We all said our goodbyes and I signed us out of the trail. What an awesome day in the woods it was. Well, it was another successful day in the woods on Mount Marshall and visiting the 1969 plane crash site on the way. Thanks to Matt and Matt for joining me on the adventure. Our day clocked in at 3,330 feet elevation gain over the 16-mile hike, most of which coming from the ascent up Mount Marshall. The High Peaks did what the High Peaks does today. It offered an unparalleled adventure while keeping us on our toes the whole time and even giving us some surprises. Thanks to all of you for listening to another episode of the 46 of 46 podcast. If you're an aspiring 46er, head over to 46outdoors.com to check out my ebook, From 1 to 46, a complete guide to climbing the High Peaks. It will serve as a very useful resource on your journey. And my latest book, Adirondack Campfire Stories, Tales and Folklore from Inside the Blue Line, is available wherever you buy your books, whether Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, or you can order it from your favorite local bookstore. And speaking of campfire stories, October is just around the corner, and you know what that means. The October sessions are coming here on the podcast. So stay tuned for some spooky, fun episodes about the Adirondack Mountains. And there's going to be some more guided group hikes coming this fall, so join my email list to be notified when those are happening, so you don't have to hike alone if you don't want to. You can join a guided group hike. Once again, that's at 46outdoors.com. And finally, if you are in need of help getting in better physical shape so that you can enjoy the mountain adventures instead of feeling like you're going to die every time you get to a summit, I work with people one-on-one to help them achieve their fitness goals, or you can check out my DIY Great Range Athlete training programs, also available at 46outdoors.com. They are tried and tested and will get you in shape for the mountains, no doubt about it. But that will do it. Thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of the 46 of 46 podcast. Remember to always leave no trace, do the rock walk, and if you carry it in, carry it out. See you on the trails.